Okay, so we'll move on to the concurrent session portion of today. So today we're going to talk with several different targeted grazers across the country and get kind of different perspectives across the U.S. on how it's being used. So it's very varied approach to using small ruminants in a lot of cases. So our first speaker is Lexie Hain. She's a farm owner in New York State since 2005. She started her solar grazing business in 2017. She co-founded the non-for-profit American Solar Grazing Association in 2018, so all this is pretty new stuff that's going on, with the goal of promoting best practices in solar grazing. The Solar Grazing Association is a co-grantee with Cornell Agricultural Economics and awarded funding through the state of New York to study both the agricultural and co-location of solar grazing opportunities. So let's give a warm welcome to Lexie Hain.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here. I plan to speak and then take some pauses for questions, but if you have questions, you're also welcome to just raise your hand. And when you do so, it's actually really helpful to know maybe where you're from or who you're representing. So this is a topic that I could take a lot of time with and I'm very passionate about, so I'll try and stay focused within half an hour. This is a practice that I'm tracking, I'm practicing. By and large, it's sheep producers around the world and in the United States, or people who have conservation grazing businesses who are really engaging with the solar industry. The third group of people who are engaging are farmers, ranchers, who are then getting jobs working directly in the industry itself and building in-house flocks of sheep to manage vegetation at ground-mounted solar arrays. This phenomenon is largely happening here in the US, where the solar is being built, and it's not necessarily correlated to where the sheep are. So I'll have some maps and track that somewhat. The pictures I'll show you are mostly photos taken just by producers, and so they're not altered in any way. And they're of the ground-mounted solar or photovoltaics or PV. So there's lots of different kinds, but generally I'll just be calling it PV solar. And they're just those flat panels. And they have to be stuck into the ground using a racking system, which is usually steel. I have quotes from some people all the way along the way. This happens to be the Clean Energy Council of Australia that we've done some work with. The Clean Energy Council of Australia did a really nice assessment of the footprint of solar grazing in Australia. They determined that those producers were able to gain access to a lot more grazing ground because in those rangeland environments, you could graze under the panels for some season extension and overall increase in forage production. Now, the one error I thought in their thinking was that those producers were not getting paid to move their flocks, manage their flocks, and fundamentally manage vegetation. And this is really a vegetation management business. So we're here in the targeted grazing workshop. And so they concluded, the Clean Energy Council, that you couldn't possibly do this in a place where there aren't already a lot of sheep. And I would agree with them, except if you pay the producers, I'll bet you we can find some sheep and we can do some targeted grazing in places that don't already have large flocks. So fundamentally, this is a pretty big opportunity for the expansion of the sheep industry in the United States. It is sheep, by and large, because of how the projects are designed and built. The sheep can generally fit under the panels, around the panels, have the right behavior to be compatible with solar, which is a little bit fragile. They are these glass panels in a field. So you can't have a lot of rubbing, jumping, etc. There's also a lot of live, hot collection lines and wires to bring in that newly formed, to that electricity, collect it, and bring it all down and eventually get it into our grid. So we can't have animals wanting to chew or get tangled. So as producers, when you end up going and walking around solar facilities, working with those companies, you're going to want to help them look at wire management. And you're going to want to look at the CAD drawings and designs. This is what I spend a lot of time doing now, and saying, what if we tied up the wires this other way? We're a little more thoughtful about that. There's also other wires and configurations where sheep outperform our main competitors, and those are landscaping services. Where we don't step up, we are giving jobs to landscapers. These are my 4 talking points to take away. Item 2, the sun on the panels is what the solar industry needs. They need that performance guarantee. Without that performance guarantee, they don't make money, and we don't get our work. We also need our technicians to be able to walk up and down the lanes. So by technicians, I mean solar technicians. They need site access in the west, the east, and in the west, again, there's also other fire considerations with our vegetation. In the east and southeast, there's also concerns about snakes and related. So they need clear ability to get to the places where they need to work and troubleshoot. In a well-functioning solar array, you might have technicians there twice a year. It's not that often. 3, you all probably know more about grazing and biodiversity than I do, but I spend a lot of time trying to sort of tell my anecdotal stories, show pictures, but any evidence that we can say that our system of management improves biodiversity, improves soil health, XYZ, helps us get an edge over those landscapers. And the main reason we need that is because the real people making decisions at the solar companies, those asset managers, those business folks, they're right out of Wall Street. So we need to just say, I know this, you just spent $500 million on this solar array. You're going to let me in with my flock of sheep. I'm going to do a really careful job managing it, and it's going to have all these other benefits. And the last thing is, of course, is farmer partnerships. You don't get farmer partnerships unless you hire farmers. I'm not going to get into all of this. This can be a copy later. This is from, I pulled this from Acciona. It just happens to be a sample. They're an Italian solar firm. They also do wind. A lot of these companies do both. Now they're also doing storage, which is a way of saying different forms of batteries in order to give power supply more evenly over a day. Yeah, there's a lot of devils in the details. Quickly, where's the solar? Darker colors mean more solar. It is a 50-state market, including Hawaii. And the general industry trend is a lot more ground-mounted solar. There's 2 general classes of solar PV. It's not a federal standard, it's just the one I use. The one I use says that about less than 100 acres to something like 5 acres is called community scale or direct generation. And 100 acres or more, and I'm seeing more being 13,000, 18,000 acre projects now. That's utility or grid scale. All these projects also have in common that they are required to have perimeter fences. And again, this is an area where when you see a project getting built or permitted, or you can have access to the developer or to someone on your town or county planning, let's get good livestock fencing in there and not just some kind of wildlife friendly that can let all the coyotes eat my sheep. Thank you very much. This was my forecast in 2021 spring. The states that have some solar grazing, the purple is places where I would document there's at least one solar grazed array. If you're a sheep producer, you're going to giggle a little because where are our top sheep states? Hey, we got Texas and California, right? And we've got Iowa this year. There are 2 projects in Iowa that are now grazed. So hooray, it's coming, and it's coming fast. And it looks like I may have just gotten some federal funding to help track that better. Fingers crossed, can't say more. Massive deployment. Massive deployment. Look at what the solar industry thinks it's planning on doing. So these are federal goals, blue. This is the current industry growth. So people, where are we? 2020, oh God, we're here, we're there. So this sort of is this projection based on what the current trends have been. This is the growth that they want to see. Very much this has been on a state-by-state basis, which you kind of saw up there. It was very intentional to use the states. In the South, you've got, I don't know, twice the sunshine and generally fewer regulations. So in the North, so it's easy to kind of make money faster because the price of solar modules racking as a system has come down about 90% in the past 10 years. That's why we're seeing it. So in northern states, what we see are states with maybe more permitting requirements, maybe more regulations, but also rich incentives for developers to get their projects built. So that's why it's an interesting set of, those are very generalized trends, by the way. I'm just trying to sort of broadly summarize 50 states in 30 minutes. Okay, this is my first question break. I'm going to just scroll through a couple pictures. I would take like 1 or 2, or I can keep going. A managed grazing array. A friend of mine who was a dairyman in northern New York. He currently, he sold his last cows this spring. It's all grass-based. He's the kind of person who makes, 10,000 bales a year. New York, he's got access to plenty of hay for his sheep. He's trying to sell things locally, and this was his first grazing contract. When I talked to him about 2 weeks ago, he called and said, Lexie, I've just been offered 8 more sites. And I'm like, yep, here we go, Jonathan. And those were bifacial panels. Doesn't matter. There's some that have monofacial, so there's solar collection on one side. Bifacial is the new trend where it actually collects it off the backside. So you live in a snowy state. On those snowy days, and also just light-colored ground cover that they collect from both sides. Oh, I'm sorry.
My question was, are males use more than females, or females are the standard?
I'd say females are the standard, but what I'm seeing also is people interested in grazing flocks of wethers. So we'll see. Yeah, generally, the recommended thing is graze, dry, use. But I'd see people doing kind of all sorts of things for producer-specific reasons and site-specific reasons.
How do you give water to the animals?
I will cover that in a sec. Really good question, and if you have a solar project coming on your land or you're able to work with a developer, that is something that's a lot easier to talk to the developer about and put in that solar lease, which is a real estate transaction. So if you're leasing part of your land to solar, get that solar company to add that to the lease that there's water rights. There's some large grazed arrays, I have pictures in a minute, where the utility sold all the water rights off back to the municipality. The place had 500 acres of wells. They haul water to those sheep. These are more fixed racking systems, so they don't move. You can kind of see some of the wiring. You can also see it's a mixture. There's wool breeds, there's hair sheep. You want to make sure in your contract you have the ability to use Electronet and an energizer. You also want to work with any techs on the site so they know how to turn that stuff on and off. You also need to know you're working in a remote location by and large, so got to check your sheep a little more often, and you have to pay yourself for that. We do have a sample contract that we built 2 years ago. It's freely available on our website to producers who want to work with solar companies. We will be overhauling that this spring with our legal team. Again, it'll still be freely available, but it'll be an overhaul. I think it'll be great. Here he is moving his flock. It's my friend Jonathan again.
With guardian dogs.
That was something that wasn't in the first contract, but a right to have guardian dogs. Most people don't use them. The fences are usually pretty good. I myself have never had to use one until this year. The people I know who are using them are rare, like 1 in 40. And it has to do with the integrity of the perimeter fences and the fact that in this case, it's a 250-acre solar array, and they lamb on site. So once he brings the flock there in May every year, he lambs, he leaves them, he rotates them within the site, and then he adjusts, he pulls off lambs and weans later. But they have guardian dogs because they're both lambing, and the fences have gaps. You can design for better. Yes?
Other than height, is there other things that limit the ability of other species like cattle to graze? I've seen some higher ones for cattle somewhere.
University of Minnesota near Pipestone has a project. Dr. Bradley Hain. It's not in Pipestone.
Sorry. Pipestone is a really big sheep area, but yeah.
It's okay. Dr. Bradley Hain.
It's right by where I live.
It's there. You go. What's it like?
They spent the extra money to mount those solar panels up higher than normal so that he actually runs an organic grass-fed dairy on the research station. And so it's part of that whole system there that they're grazing those dairy cattle underneath the. I keep saying I need to visit with him and get the financials on it to see what it costs to put those extra high.
Yeah.
And if it's paying off, but.
It's definitely more expensive. So cattle's the big question. We have a free monthly webinar that you can log into if you sign up through our website. We just interviewed the Department of Energy recipient for the cattle question, which is Silicon Ranch, which is a solar company based in Tennessee. Right now they're trying a bunch of really neat things, but they haven't actually built anything yet. The two tricky things with the cattle is when you raise the racking, there's a lot more wind load, and then there's also the public, so it is more expensive to build. Right now, the trend in the industry will not make anyone happy, including me, is they're going lower and lower and lower to the ground because the price of steel is going up. So it's going the opposite way. And cattle racking, the other trick that's neat if you watch the recording is you'll see them, they have a managed grazing system as part of their plan, where they're actually planning on modifying the solar. Yes, humor me there and say people are very interested in it. The other trick is public perception and permitting. So getting one of those projects built may be a little tricky. We might see it.
We have one in Vermont.
Yes, you do, yeah. And on some dairy farms. There's a small firm that built some on-farm dairies. So it works for the animals.
It works for the animals, but yes, it's much more expensive for the infrastructure.
Yep.
Do you guys have an idea of how much more? Is it 20%, 50%, double, triple?
I don't know. I can tell that when you talk to solar developers in a very competitive environment, they all go, that's nice.
The other issue I heard with that is that with the elevated solar panels is worker safety. Now you get, because you got to put people on ladders instead of being able to work from the ground. It's an issue.
Yeah, for the installation of the project. They don't want them any taller than a person can reach. Yeah. That's a hard battle, and it's worth fighting, but it's a challenge. Yeah.
And I've talked to some solar companies too, and I'm a goat guy, so don't hold that against me, but he talked about worried about micro cracking, and if you're getting lower and stuff too, or something like, I think he called it micro cracking, say like a sheep say it's a sheep, if it gets low.
Yep.
You know, but the data was really not there, like it might reduce performance over time, but they really don't know.
Yeah.
What do you about that?
They're trying to protect their asset.
No, I get that.
And so, if you can, I would say to this and also to people just who haven't done it, and most people haven't done it, is you have to get yourself a pilot project. That's the ticket. And if you want a pilot project with like Cornell is giving away 900 old modules. I can get you connected to some practice modules, build a system, work with someone. But that's what I'm going to say by and large to people if you're building comfort. There are a few companies who are totally getting excited about this, doing this at scale, but mostly it hasn't been done yet. So it's like, oh, shoot. Oh, well, the last one basically just quickly was also solar on landfills. Certain states have landfill, brownfield incentives. You can imagine trying to weed whack that. So everything 100% has to be built above ground for the infrastructure, but it also gives you a sense of that infrastructure. Normally, they bury all those collection lines a minimum of 2.5 feet, so you can easily, put in posts and such. You do need to tell your sites. I have a good working relationship with all the places where I graze. Hi, it's Lexie. I'm going to put in posts right now, steel posts, yes. 6 inches deep, yeah, that's fine.
Why are you putting in posts?
Oh, I'm excluding, there's these, I don't have time today, but there are these equipment pads where they, and I exclude the sheep from these equipment pads because otherwise they lie on the nice concrete that's the temperature they like, which I don't care, but the technicians care. Yeah. Just a quick sense of utility scale solar. This is by and large what we're going to see in the United States in the next few years. This happens to be a picture just for sense. This is like 350 fenced acres. Here's a picture of a project in Florida. It is fully grazed and managed. There's a conservation, what we're seeing, there's a firm in Minnesota, there's a firm in Florida. They have conservation grazing as like part of what they already do, and they've really gone in full for the solar grazing. A+ environmental restoration. I'd be happy to find it for you. Oh, it's Tampa Bay Electric's properties. Yeah, they own all their own flocks, and they don't even sell lamb. Yeah.
So are these contracts largely the producers being paid to graze, or?
It's the only way to do it. So there were a couple of reasons a few years ago, and I was like, we better start an association so that we get paid. We have budgeting tools, and actually Kimberly Hagan here, I want to give her credit, helped us on our website to help producers, but essentially it's targeted grazing where you have to look at those costs. Yeah. It's fine.
Just a quick question. When you were talking about your friend Jonathan, who
Yeah.
got like 8 more sites coming on board, what's
Yeah.
like your typical strategy for increasing your herd size for those contracts? Is it just like acquiring whatever kind of sheep suppliers you can meet up with?
No, you got to be really careful. I'm not going to cover that so much. I will tell you, you have to be pretty thoughtful about this. Like, yeah, I started with 22 acres the first year. This year we're just about 500 acres. So how do you deal with that? So, you subcontract, there's a whole bunch of like business strategies to kind of accommodate that. I also will say there's the mow and graze strategy. The picture on the left is, just a targeted mowing. It's not that easy to see, but with it right behind in front of the leading edge of the panels, just to help you when everything's going like crazy. It's like, okay, it's May, June. How am I going to have enough sheep right in May and June? Because in August, what am I going to do? Well, just a strategic mowing right there. It's not that expensive to do. Can be done quickly. Can help you balance. Another thought on the balance. I have a picture of my friend Eli, who does a lot he's based in San Antonio. It's South Texas curbing. He does a lot of balancing mowing and grazing. And I'd say there's a couple major producers who do that right now. You've got to balance the mowing and the grazing because the demand right now is so intense. You won't necessarily have enough sheep, and you can't grow that quickly. Yeah, and you get asked. The problem is you'll get a contract with this one company. You buy the insurance, which usually if you already own a farm is not a big deal, but some money. And then they'll say, here's 8 more sites here, but what about the 2 over there? What should I do about that? That's 400 miles from my house. I'm going to call you. You want those? That's how this kind of grows a little bit. Here's our perimeter fencing question. In places with high predator risk, we see that there's also a skirting on that fence, and they do an herbicide spray just to keep that. The picture with the amazing gate is in Canada. That farmer, he produces like 20,000 lambs a year, and some of them are on 150 acres of solar. He was able to work with the project developer to get them to put in some of this kind of specialty stuff. He and his brother flew to England and produced a book on what they wanted to see. It's also on our website, free. Water supply. This is the big one. This is where when I go up against landscapers and they're like, well, I'm like, I'll lower my price, $75 an acre for my annual contracts if you give me a water supply, or $50, whatever it is. I try to incentivize if there's not already a water supply. This is where we need to work up front to try and get water supply, water distribution. I've been working with NRCS technical services divisions now to put in distributed water supplies at some solar arrays. Let's figure out ways to do that and get that paid for. Makes our lives a lot easier. The National Renewable Energy Lab produced a look at the capital costs for the different kinds of co-utilization of solar, and the solar grazing came out to be fairly competitive. It was that cost of, they hit us with the cost of the well. Said, all right, you producers, or the solar companies, you're gonna put in that well for your grazers, which means we're not quite as competitive. So if they're looking at fine margins, it's just one more thing. Spending a lot of time now, we started working with Ernst & Cornell to build a template seed mix a couple years ago. I'd love to see this all over the country. The solar firms are typically required to put in, they have to have a solar site seed mix specified. This is a room of people who can probably figure out what those seed mixes should be. I'm getting solar firms to listen to this, to buy seed mixes like this. Let's customize these seed mixes. Erosion control is their big concern. So let's get things planted before construction starts. And often I'm getting the farmer, landowner, to do that planting. So if we can get things planted in advance, get erosion control and stabilization, I think we're going to win a lot more. It's going to be more successful overall for all of us. It's a lot less struggle. A lot better for our sheep. Couple more things and I can wrap up. I don't know where I am on time. We also teamed up with, there's a few other people in the industry who deal with anything living at the solar facilities, I'm going to call it. We worked with these groups to build a solar beekeeping template. So similar to the solar grazing contract, it's another way where if you're a beekeeper, apiarist, you can now have a model for how this business arrangement could work, because otherwise nobody knew. There was about 5 practitioners in the United States doing this as an extension of their commercial beekeeping businesses. This is a little bit more about us. Who are we? We're a membership-based organization. Our members are a really nice mix of solar industry professionals, support folks such as Extension and NRCS, and producers who want to do this or are doing it. We do have a law clinic that sponsors us, thank goodness. And then just quickly, for the projects we're working on now, as soon as we publish stuff, I put it on our website. I am excited to work with NRCS more in 2022 at their plant materials centers to trial solar site seed mixes. The solar grazing contract, you can download it, you can tweak it. I had to sign it myself this past spring. I was like, what? Whose contract is this? And then we've also developed an app that's actually getting a little bit of an overhaul. It's going to be amazing. But where you can put your sheep business and you can say, I'm interested in doing this, and put the contact information. Part of why this is so important is because it is really hard to track people down by and large at the solar community. There's ways to do it, and I can give you all some tips if we have time. How's my time, Ben?
Yeah, we'll kind of wrap up.
Okay. Okay, that's my happy. Thank you. Do you want a tip for how to, where do you want? You want a question or two, or are we done? Yeah.
What do you do about worming?
There's a protocol that we worked with some folks at Cordell to have right protocols, but you absolutely want to make sure you've wormed, you've got healthy flocks going out in advance. I recommend people work with, and I'm seeing this a little more in contracts now, you have like a protocol in general to work with the state level veterinarian once a year, or you work with your veterinarians on general health, just to reassure the solar firms you've got healthy sheep going out there. I myself generally worm only strategically, and you do your framacha, and I've got Katahdins and Dorpers, and I have very, very low incidences of problems, and you absolutely have to have an active managed grazing program because you've got a lot of forage to control, and you have to keep moving them around. Is that kind of, yeah, I can talk. Yeah.
From the solar industry side of things, would the only interest or advantage they would have to opening up to cattle grazing just be to have more access to more producers and livestock?
Maybe. I think they generally are trying to build more alliances across like rural America and with farmers and producers. And I think they're going to find their permitting battles increasingly challenging. So I think it could come, but it is significantly more expensive. That's the kind of thing we'd like to see. I'd like to see some pilot projects. Like I said, some of the, like what New Jersey is doing. If you look, they have a agricultural tax level for people trying this out. So their tax for the solar facility stays in ag. Something like that. They're going to need something like that to flip that switch. Sorry, I'm going on. Yeah.
No. Yeah, we'll take, we should have Lexie here at the end, so let's give Lexie a round of applause. So our next speaker will move across the U.S. to California. Andree Soares is a fourth-generation California sheep rancher raised in the San Joaquin Valley in her family's commercial sheep ranching business. Andree initially followed her mother's footsteps as a registered nurse and was in nursing practice for over 29 years. In 2014, Andree purchased a targeted grazing company as a side business, which quickly required her full-time management. Along with her livestock manager and team of herders, truckers, and project managers, Star Creek Land Stewards primarily provides custom grazing services with sheep and goats throughout California. She is fortunate that her passion and opportunity met with her readiness for change. Andree serves as a director of the board of Western Range Association, which is H2A Labor, vice president of the California Wool Growers Association as director, and then also represents the California Wool Growers Association on the Rangeland Management Advisory Committee. She currently manages her father's commercial sheep operation, the Talbot Sheep Company. Let's welcome Andree.
Good morning, everybody. So that says a lot about who I am, so I won't go into that. But I've been doing this, I was raised in it in a commercial sheep operation, did the nursing I was a neonatal nurse in management most of my 29 years, and pivoted around 2014, and have never looked back. I love it. Loved what I did before, and love what I'm doing now. So a little bit about how we do things. When we come in, first of all, we do projects of probably, I got some really bad news about an accident at home just before this, and so I'm a little bit off, but I might jump around a little bit. We do projects, a minimum of 10 acres, and we do anything from private to public agencies to multi-agency projects. I have about 7,300 head of animals in my grazing operation. Then I subcontract out sometimes my father's commercial wool sheep depending on where we're going and what the need is. I have mostly about 2/3 of my herd are Spanish Boer cross goats, and the rest of my animals are Dorper sheep, hair sheep, which I never even had seen in my life until I purchased this grazing company. And they were really hard to look at first because if you know, you know, right? So, but I've learned to love them all, and especially the goats. Growing up in California and even around sheep and in a very rural area, I never really understood why a person ever had a goat. I couldn't get it, like, drive around and see a person with a goat. Like, why would you have a goat? And now I love goats. What's really, the highlights of what we do is we are contacted by a client. We do our best in the early stages of our relationship to establish and manage expectations, help people understand what animals can and cannot do with regard to their goats. And then we just engage the relationship. We always do a site visit before we bring animals. I never do anything. I never show up to an area sight unseen. This is kind of what we look like when we show up. Sometimes we come in big vehicles and big rigs, and sometimes, most of the time, where we do most of our grazing is in the Bay Area of California, where you can't get big rigs in. So a lot of what we do is gooseneck. Our grazing season is typically March. Our contracted grazing season is typically March through September. And this looks like we're grazing a solar area. We're really not. Those are solar panels next to a school. We're grazing for the school. Some more images here. We have H2A labor, which is very critical to what we do. I have about 11 during the peak of the grazing season. They all come to us from Peru. Most of our herders have been with us. Some have been with us since the very beginning. We have a father, his 2 sons, his nephew, and his brother-in-law. A lot of when we need another herder, they often want us to bring over relatives. We work through Western Range Association to do all that permitting and everything, and it really works well. It's a very critical link to what we do, and it's being threatened right now with wage issue, but they are managing the animals on the ground, grazing, contracted grazing season and a non-contracted grazing season. They are the guys on the ground day in and day out, and they're they're excellent at what they do. We like to train our own, so we like to not have. It's okay with us if we get a herder who has very, very little experience, because they really are able to learn quickly on the ground from the other herders and from us. A little bit about the animals. This crowd knows all about that, so don't need to spend much time here. This is our annual cycle. Right now the animals are home. Lambing is finishing up. Kidding will start soon. And we're all done with that around February, and then we hit the road and we begin grazing out on contracts until they come back again in September. We have, a few years ago, we put together, I'm getting to it here, the types of herds. Typically, our grazing projects, we break the animals up into herd sizes of 400 to 600. Depending on where they're going, what the terrain is, what the vegetation is, we determine if we're going to send all sheep, all goats, or mixed herds. We also put together, over the last several years, a large wether herd. We've got a lot of wether goats, and I don't do wether sheep. I don't graze with wether sheep. That came up in the previous question, but wether goats, and they've been a really wonderful asset. They're hardy. They don't have increasing nutritional demands where you have to get them off of bad feed and onto good feed because they're not gestating. They're very efficient. They can move through an area really, really quickly, and they're just extremely hardy. This is a fresh paddock. Fence just went up. Animals in. That was the end of that day. Yeah, do you have a question?
Just a quick one, so do you set up the fencing for every single place, or do you sometimes move them through an area without putting up fencing?
Always fencing, always fencing. And this is the fence we use, yeah. Yeah. And actually anymore in California, there's rarely any free herding in California. And then the animals moved on to the next paddock. What kind of projects do we do? Some small private landowners, I said we don't do less than 10 acres. We don't unless it's contiguous. And typically for private homeowners, what they're wanting is defensible space for fire prevention. I would have started with a little bit of wildfire stuff, but I'm kind of off my game this morning. But wildfire is big business in California. And the threat and you hear it in people's voice when they call for your service. They're really concerned. And they're learning more and more about how livestock can help protect and meet those needs. We do larger private and public, 10 to 50 acre school districts, private ranches, private homeowners, regional parks, for cities, for homeowners association, counties, open space districts, and then multi-agency projects, which are, there's a few areas in California where there's been some really extremely well organized collaboration to do mixed public and private and create some really thoughtful, defensible space. And I've been fortunate enough to be part of one of them up in Marin County, which is north of San Francisco. This is an example of, so this is a mapping of a private home. And there's that same private home that got together with whose neighbors saw we were there and said, hey, come do this. And then when that was done, you can see what a great defensible space they were able to obtain by collaborating for that neighborhood. And then those two images are embedded in this. This is the overall map. This is about 400 acres of work that I had 4 herds doing for about 4.5 months. And this mapping, we worked closely with the fire district in that area, who's the lead collaborator on this. And those different colors represent different herds. And I was able to, we were able to get all of this done and maybe had to put a herd on a truck 2 times in 4 months, which is remarkable for the type. We do a lot of trucking, a lot of moving, a lot of loading, unloading in the Bay Area. And so this has really been a great, great project. And really it's because of the collaborative nature of the people, of the partners who are in there. Yes, sir. I can do that right now. We use dogs. We have to balance where we're going to put dogs with, well, you guys know this, but we're always concerned about are we in a place where there's a lot of domestic dogs? Is there a lot of public? And the answer to all those questions for us is most often yes. But where we go, most of the places that we go, there isn't a huge predator threat. Here there is. There's a lot of open space here. And we have to do a lot of education with the public, and it's taken time for people to understand the purpose of the guard dogs in the pen, in the paddock, and what to expect and not to engage. We use a lot of signage and a lot of public communication. Great Pyrenees Akbash mix, or mostly that's mostly what we are breeding now across.
Do you have any problem with them as far as handling them?
No.
Okay, because you handle them enough.
A lot. They load and unload in the gooseneck. Yeah, they go right through the corral, right in the chute. Yeah.
So do your workers spend the night?
Yes, our herders all stay on site in camp trailers, self-contained camp trailers. And we rarely will put a herd out without somebody on that site, even if it's, especially if it's a 2-acre job. If it's a 2-acre job, you're in a tight area to begin with. So we always have herders out with the animals. Is there a language barrier? In California speaks a lot of Spanish now. So that's very helpful, and and my herders have been with me a long time, and their English is getting better. So yes, there is a barrier sometimes. I sometimes get phone calls, and my herder will put me on the phone with the person that he's trying to communicate with, or they've engaged him and just try to get the message across. But we're always accessible. In my structure of my company, it's worked out now that I spend a lot more time at my desk on a computer than I used to or would like to. But I have a livestock manager who manages all of the herders, all of the livestock. He was born and raised in it. His father was my father's original foreman. I could not have a better partner to do that aspect of the work. And then my daughter graduated from college a couple of years ago, and she is my project manager now, and she is fluent in Spanish, and we've got a good thing going right now. She does all the client communication, she does all the marketing, and in fact, she moves up to Marin County and lives up there for 5 months out of the year. So she's managing all of these projects. It does take a lot of management, It's, shifting from a commercial operation type approach to a service-based operation, which is what this is. You have to constantly recognize it as that. You're a service provider. They're bringing you in, they're paying you. You are meeting their need. So that's why it's also really important to manage expectations from the beginning, to let them know you're not going to jeopardize your animal's health. You do have limits, right? So managing those expectations from the beginning is very important. So this just depicts in all this schematic here. You can see we have a couple of private ranches, 2 schools, homeowners associations. Some of that work is for 2 different cities there, some for a fire protection district and a regional park. So a lot of different landowners coming together to get that work done. And there's a video I have here that I hope I can get to play. But there was actually a fire. About a month and a half after, middle of October. There was a fire in that area, and it was contained, and they are ecstatic about it and really attribute it to the grazing that's been going on. Okay, let's see if this will load. Probably not going to load. But what it was depicting is we were able to get from their fire cams, they sent us the video, and they were able to contain the fire. It was in the middle of that mapping was an open space, and they were able to contain the fire to about 4 acres, and it stopped. It stopped where it met the grazing. And they were also provided with grazing, and it was planned this way. The fire district, we knew all along why we were grazing in strategic areas. We weren't brought in to graze the whole 2,000 acres, right? We had very specific mapping like that, and they had the fire department was able to stage on an area that was grazed, so that was safe. They had all their equipment in there, and then that fire ultimately stopped where the grazing had been going on. So. I have to say it was pretty cool. We got a text from the fire captain, and he said, "Fire at such and such. We're about to see how the goats really work," and it was awesome. He kept us apprised of the whole thing, and then sent us the video. And the whole neighborhood was in California. One of the major issues that increases the risk of wildfire is the fact that we have nestled neighborhoods into the wildland-urban interface. Or we've created a wildland-urban interface by nestling, really lovely neighborhoods and cities into the coastal range, where really there shouldn't be that type of housing without, in my opinion, without better protections. The area that Big Map is of, they have 2-lane roads that go off of a main highway. There's a two-lane roads that take you in about 5 miles to the open space, which is a coastal range. And it's totally congested in California, totally congested in that area. and 2-lane roads with houses and houses and houses nestled here, and little tiny roads and this and that. And there's schools. We're in that area. There's two schools that are nestled right into that open space. And the emergency response plan, I learned, for those elementary schools is to shelter in place, because they know those kids will die trying to get them out of there, because all of the neighborhoods will be flooding those surface streets. And I'm sure most families don't know that, but they had no intention of trying to get those kids out because they know they'll die trying. So they've been very thoughtful about now grazing very well around those schools, because they're not moving those kids out. And one of them is a boarding school. So yeah, that was, I was shocked. I made him tell me that like 3 times when he said that. I thought, oh my God, you're kidding. And then also in those open spaces, they've had us graze along their fire roads. Those fire roads, California, have taken on a whole new meaning of importance over the last decade. The fire crews know that they'll never get fire crews to the fire on surface streets because of what I just described. The evacuation will be happening. So they really depend on those fire roads. So we've grazed both sides of the fire roads very well, so that they're not, A, so they can get through, and B, that they don't start another fire getting through. So what are the challenges? Mother Nature, as we all know, where land is steep, we recommend with the client to avoid certain areas, help them understand why it doesn't make sense for us to do that. Maybe do another strategic area that really still creates their defensible space but doesn't create erosion. Drought, right? That's all in California, where it's really, really a huge concern, and it's impacting how we do our work all the time. Invasive and protected species. We're often brought in and work with biologists that our clients have engaged to determine where and when we should graze, to promote native grasses, and to help eradicate invasives. Our herders are often trained by the biologists about what to look for, what not to look for. We often do a dance around nesting birds, and when we can get in, the biologists will often have to walk the area 24 hours before we can put our fence up, and then we put our fence up, and if we see any nesting birds, we have to report that. The next day we go to build that paddock, we have to work with the biologist to make sure he's walked the perimeter before we can get there. That gets a little clunky, but you get, again, communication is key. Water access, you have to make sure, obviously, that you can get water to the animals. During the grazing season, I often have hydrant meters from about 6 different water districts in California, and have water, work off like construction companies work. You get a hydrant meter for your project. This is what we do, and our herders know how to get water from fire hydrants. We load our water trailer, and then our water trailer feeds our troughs. So we often have to use quads to get to certain areas. Sometimes we can't get anything there. We have to help engage neighbors to use backyard hoses. That's our last resort, because that is time consuming too, making all of those contacts. But it's something it's an important element to a successful operation. Obviously, you can't do it without it. And then, like I mentioned, planning and scheduling and rescheduling, right? So whenever I'm making my calendar, 8 months in advance, and I never commit to a time frame. I never commit to a date. I commit to a range. Because things are always moving. We're dependent on Mother Nature. We're depending on the prior project that did or did not go as planned based on your estimation of that project. So, we make a general plan, and then we keep communicating with that client. So we keep refining as our schedule gets more and more refined. It's a 24/7 operation. You're never down. When I bought this in 2014, the last thing I did was tell my father, because I had a feeling he'd tell me it was a bad idea, which he did. but he told me, I just, you're going to be worrying all the time and phone calls all the time, and I don't want you to have to live like that. I said, listen, Daddy, I was a nursing manager for neonatal intensive care. I said, I'm on call all the time now anyway, and on a bad day at work, babies die. How bad could this be? So it really, it was an easy shift for me to make that way. Labor issues, huge, huge, huge. There's a lot of states going through H-2A issues. California passed ag overtime bill, and January 1, we are looking at being faced with or it's coming. January 1, as of now, we have to pay a wage increase of 52%. That's huge. The rest of ag was impacted at a rate of 6.5%. Sheep and goat herders, sheep and goat producers who employ herders like this are faced with a 52% wage increase. If that does not get shifted, and we're making an attempt to do that well, we've been making an attempt for 2.5 years. We're entering litigation. But if something doesn't halt that, the sheep industry in California could be majorly, the whole face of that will change. It's frightening. Policy change, here's my soapbox here. Ag overtime is huge. Local ordinances that allow for grazing in city limits. So I graze in city limits in most of the Bay Area in 5 or 6 different counties. And I come from, like I said, a very rural area of California. I can't graze in the city limits of my town. Interesting, because the local ordinances don't allow it. Local measures that drive policy and funding for collaborative community wildfire protection. In Marin County, that's what they did. They taxed themselves to be able to do fire protection methods. And then, of course, state measures that call out grazing as a vegetation management tool. And in California, we were recently able to get grazing as an approved vegetation management tool used by, recognized by California and CAL FIRE. Opportunities, community outreach and education. We always, every year we're doing field days, inviting school kids out. We're often grazing right near schools. We invite them out. We do stuff like this locally and within California. Public policy via industry association, educating lawmakers and state agencies and municipalities. This has really, I've seen a shift here, but there's so much more opportunity to make for policy change and using so much more livestock in California. More interagency collaboration is an opportunity, and insurance companies. I think this is an untapped opportunity. I think there's leverage to be gained by engaging insurance companies that we've not done yet. This is my last slide. This was what the fire battalion chief told us. Well, you saw that. Previous slide was actually the picture of that one fire. And this is what he said. The fire ran out of fuel when it hit the area that was grazed, from Todd Blando, battalion chief and wildfire hazard mitigation specialist at Central Marin Fire Department. That's why we do what we do. It's extremely rewarding. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it, and you can convert people by getting them out there. And it's been the fact that this is being done now in such public places has been wonderful for the industry, because you make friends out of foes like that, and people learn to understand the benefit of livestock on the landscape. And I think that's the end of my presentation. Any other questions? Any questions? Yes.
So are you able to, with the relationships that you're building with the communities, obviously you have another product to sell.
Yes.
You're ultimately selling, lamb meat, goat meat. Are you able to kind of
Massage that?
Yeah.
Yes. We always tell the truth out there, and yes, we sell and people, we don't get much pushback. We really don't. We just explain what we do. Yeah, we sell part of our lamb herd. We haven't sold goats in a long time because I've been growing that herd. But we don't get much pushback at all about that. Once they see it, they just love it. I have to tell you, they just love seeing the livestock out there. And they tell their own story, Yes?
You have to worry about poisonous plants.
Some, yes. Some, we've had bad experiences, but we have learned better, right, over time. Because when we were going into this area, when we started grazing in the Bay Area, that wasn't typical vegetation for us, so we didn't know it as well as we know it now. So we don't have that problem anymore. We had one bad experience, and we lost 12 goats in one night to a weed, but we're getting better, much better. Yes?
Could you see yourself working year-round on any level of goats? Say,
Our grazing season is getting longer? Like we're going to start. I said we go out in like March, April, but this year we're going to deploy a herd to a vineyard for the first time, and that's going to be in end of the month. So that's early for us, and it's for a different that's their request to have the animals in at that time based on their cycle. So yeah, I do see it eventually, but it would really be hard to do because I'm still going to have the breeding herd on really good stuff, and for lambing and kidding. We never have lambs. We're never lambing and kidding on a job. Never, never, never. Where there's life, there's death. That never works out in the public. So we don't send lambs out on jobs. That's all stays at home.
Well, we want to thank Andree a lot. She does have to run. She did have a family emergency. We really appreciate her telling her story, and if anybody has things they'd like to talk to her about later, let us know. Did you get your stick? Okay. I ruined that. Pull yours up. Hopefully I didn't. So our next speaker is Lisa Surber, Dr. Lisa Surber. She is, I've worked with Lisa for a lot of years. She was originally, I met Lisa in Montana State University. We did a lot of targeted grazing in Montana, and a lot of it was due to the work that had been done by Montana State University in helping us create those relationships with weed districts, with different landowners, with government agencies working on noxious weeds, and then not only creating those relationships, but strengthening those by looking at plots, telling the story of what's going out on the range, telling the ranchers or the owners of the land if they're getting a return on this sheep grazing investment, and they're not just stealing grass along the way, and those type of things. So it's really building those stories that really sells this. So right now she's going to talk about the Targeted Grazing Handbook, and I think we have about 4 or 5 copies of the old handbook that are underneath the American sheep industry table over there. So if anybody would like to have a copy of that, and that's really based on a lot of research early on. And what we're doing with that, with a lot of people's help, including Lexie, Andree, Lisa, myself, and John Walker, who's in the room with us today, is rewriting that book and putting some applicable process behind a lot of that. So telling a lot of these how-tos, because the how-tos are very different across a lot of different parts of this industry. So I'll let Lisa take off from there, and let's give her a warm round of applause.
Thanks, Ben. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Ben was very kind in inviting me. My background, as he mentioned, is very diverse. And so I'm sitting on this group of individuals that are rewriting this book, and I thought to myself when I initially got on board with this, why the heck do we need to do this? I mean, we have a really good publication as it is. And then I hear stories like Lexie's and Andree's, and it's just fascinating to me how much this industry has evolved since this publication, the initial publication first came online, and it was late 2006. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. I think for time purposes, I may skip over a few slides so we can kind of get back on track with time, and because I really think the questions that are generated from this group is really what we are here to talk about. So forgive me while I page through some of these, because really you all know the story about targeted grazing and the benefits of it, that we're really talking about managing landscapes through the use of animals. And we're really fortunate in some of the sheep, and particularly sheep and goats, that we are able to utilize, and that's why I asked Andree about that question, is she able to bridge that gap between utilizing her livestock on the land and then selling that product later on? Because really most of us who are in the sheep and goat business have another product that we're trying to market as well, whether it's dairy, wool, or meat. And so I think it's important to recognize that as well. We know the benefits of it. We know that I think we just need to continue to tell our story. And we in this room here probably do a fairly good job of it. But, I think of somebody like my dad who, has a hard time speaking in public. To tell his story about the products that he produces is very difficult. And so publications like this that we'll talk about are really telling the positive story of landscape management using livestock. And so I think that's an important thing to recognize. So as we mentioned, we put out this very, very good publication that utilized the most cutting edge current research in the targeted grazing realm in a university and agency setting. In 2007, we really pushed that publication forward. It was a very well received publication, and it was well thought out, well put together. But as we move forward in time now, we can see that there was some holes in it. Just kind of as a reminder that this publication was a cooperative project through the National Sheep Industry Improvement Center, which is a vital agency within our small ruminant world or in the sheep industry. John is very aware, and he can tell you and testify that granting agencies, it's becoming more and more difficult to get research dollars for some of these smaller industries. And so the National Sheep Industry Improvement Center is one agency or one group that certainly provides a lot of funding, very diverse funding across the country. And of course, our parent organization, the American Sheep Industry Association, was a cooperator on that. And it is the national organization for sheep producers across the country. I looked this up, and from the time that this book was first published, it said we represented 65,000 sheep producers. Now we're representing 100,000 sheep producers. And so that gives you evidence, again, of how I think the sheep industry or small ruminant industry is certainly expanding across the country. So we have one of the most important people in this publication in the room, and of course that's Dr. Walker. He was the technical editor of it. Karen Launchbaugh was the project manager and editor of the publication. We had two university individuals that were spread thin to begin with, and we charged them with putting together this publication. And so when we move forward when I discuss the new one, you can see we took a little bit different approach to that, but thank you to those individuals that provided the overall coordination of this very extensive project. I know you have trouble seeing the picture on the left, but it illustrates the diversity of the 18 chapters that this book put forward. And again, if you don't already have a copy of it, there are still some available through the American Sheep Industry Association at a reduced cost. They still have CDs available, and actually you can print this whole book either by individual chapter through Karen's website in Idaho. So very, very comprehensive book. But as you know, in the 15 years since it was published, things have changed dramatically. And so we began the process of revising this handbook. And as Ben mentioned, this new version of is meant to be more of a how-to to do all of these. And I think that it takes this topic or just to another level. So, as I mentioned, instead of putting this in the hands of university individuals who are already, again, spread thin, the approach in this manner with this rewrite was to hire some writing consultants. And Sulani and Allison, my friend Allison Grove, are extremely capable individuals that we've put in charge of basically cat herding all the rest of us into getting our jobs done. And our ASI leads on this are Chase Adams and Erica Sanko. Again, two very competent individuals that are excellent at keeping all of our university and industry professionals working in conjunction to try and get this publication put together. And so just a little bit different approach, and it's a slow process, not gonna lie. I've put together some slides here on what the outline of the chapters are going to look like, and you can see right off the get-go that we've got a little bit different approach. Again, still utilizing some of the information from the old book, but taking it a step further. How to actually evaluate and make sure that you're doing a good job for the contract that you're working under. For instance, animal husbandry and public perception is an individual chapter on how to deal with that. Working with federal, state, and government agencies and their permits that you have to walk through. It's a very time-consuming process, but this handbook is meant to help you walk through that. We talk about a business plan. If you're using this as a business model for your operation, you have to know where you're going, and you have to be a planner. And we're even going to address some of the things like H-2A labor, which I think is, again, one of the most challenging issues for the expansion of maybe some of these practices across the U.S. And it also, as our last speaker mentioned, it could be to the detriment of our industry if we lose some of the ability to utilize those personnel. And so, again, a very comprehensive outline and plan for the chapters ahead of us. And again, we've got individuals in charge of each one of these chapters. So each chapter has the authors and leads. Some of them even, we've gone a step further and considered the process of using focus groups and taking their contributions. Those focus groups would include people that are actually out there doing the job, people that would have to look after animals, and government agencies. The idea is to put out case studies and do interviews from those individuals to make sure that we include that information in the new book. But in this process, there was a need identified, and that was to actually be able to survey. Lexie has a great resource with her organization of actually knowing who's out in the industry doing the work. We don't necessarily have that at our fingertips. So the idea was to put forth a survey to really get at the contractors and the end users of targeted grazing. And so ASI put together a survey, and actually, if I understand correctly, that survey has been revived again. And so you can actually go on and do this survey, which you can access from the ASI website. This survey, again, was designed to help us write and really make sure that we're pinpointing the information that's going to help these people on the ground do their job. So I'll just mention a few of some of the key results of this survey. Again, it was designed to figure out where these people are working, and this map gives you an idea of the respondents to this survey, where they're actually working, which doesn't exactly match up with your map at all. So, not much at all. Again, we have to, and again, I think that we're doing a good job in some areas of this, but helping people recognize that livestock grazing can be a positive activity. There is so much media press right now targeting livestock grazing as the problem, for instance, with greenhouse emissions and things like that. And we have to be able to promote livestock grazing in a positive light. So this survey uncovered that basically the respondents, there are 70 people working in 24 states, 2 Canadian provinces that went through the survey. About half the respondents had been providing targeted grazing services for more than 5 years, and 10% that had been doing targeted grazing for over 20 years. The respondents to the survey used sheep, goats, and cattle in their businesses. Targeted grazing was being used for a variety of vegetative problems, but most of them were being used for invasive plants or encroaching species. And they also were looking at addressing problems like conservation, wildlife habitat, fuel management, as we just learned in the last presentation, and solar grazing. So again, I had no idea the expansion of this industry. When I'm in my own little world in Montana and South Dakota, you don't see that variety of targeted grazing that's going on. And we have a whole new world that we should open up to. One of the other points, and I don't have it on the slide, is that 35% of the respondents to the survey indicated that they'd been in business for 5 years or less. And they said, and within that, 65% said their business had grown since they started. Again, evidence that this segment of our industry has the huge potential for growth. So just to kind of give you a brief current status right now, this is what I learned from most recently from one of our consultants, is that there'll be a series of Zoom discussions, again, bringing in these contractors or focus groups to try and get them to help us with this process, and making sure that we have some individuals from that group of contractors that would work well for case studies, and that have real expertise in that particular chapter area. So I can't emphasize enough that this is going to be probably one of the best resources for our industry in this regard. It's kind of cut off on the bottom a little, I apologize for that, but we also want to capture some of those people that are in that beginning stage, because they can really help us identify areas that they'd wish they'd known better, kind of thing. And other contractors helping new contractors. I think it's a great thing. So again, for purposes of time, I'm gonna end here. Again, these are the places where you can get the current handbook, again, online, and then through the American Sheep Industry. And I did check with Zara that they do have a few more copies of the publication, the paper publication, the book publication, that you can still get through them. And Ben mentioned that there's some on the table out in the hallway. So snatch them up. They're an excellent resource. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. If you have any questions, I'm happy to. Lexie can jump up as well, and we can address any questions that you guys might have. Yeah, and John's here as well. He would probably be an excellent resource to answer questions about the book.
Any questions for either Lisa or Lexie or yes?
Maybe you mentioned this. Do you define what a targeted grazer is?
Yeah, in the handbook, certainly yes, but it can be a varying thing. And in Montana, we had a little bit different perspective. we did a lot of contract grazing there or targeted grazing where there really wasn't much exchange of money. And I think that was, I don't like to say it was a mistake in the early stages, but it was a way of getting this process going. The landowner would help provide camp tending and water resource, or help split the cost of trucking, and the producer would get the animals there, and there was no exchange of money. And I think about in Lyle's setting, you know, you actually have a sheep producer that pays you for grazing, which is a completely different perspective, and that's in South Dakota. And so, you know, again, very, very varying styles of targeted grazing contracting going on.
There's so much difference on what the goal is of the landowner and what the goal is of the person providing the service. So if you look at yourself strictly as a service provider, then you look at it differently as if like we look at as a rancher. So what do we need and where does our income come from, and how can we help match the needs of the landowner? That can vary. You become more of a PR person than a rancher if you're good at this. But there is a lot of opportunity for young people to get into the sheep industry, kind of low barrier of entry, and do some of these things, because there's a lot of opportunity. Other questions? Go ahead.
I kind of think that I think it's the best opportunity because we're not making any more land. And so if a young person wants to come back to their family's operation, what better way to add sheep, for instance, to Lyle's operation, to add sheep to that operation where you don't see much of a change in a grazing footprint, but you can have an additional enterprise, an income enterprise. And as we know right now, the sheep industry is very, very profitable right now. From a cull ewe perspective, we've seen unprecedented prices for sheep right now. Goats too.
Do you guys have a range of when you like this book to be done? I think it'll be out.
That's a good question. Year?
I think our goal is January 2022.
23.
23.
That. Well, it's hard to believe. Ben and I were talking yesterday, and we were trying to figure out, you know, and I couldn't remember exactly when we put forth the first, and it's hard to believe that this has been that many years ago. Yeah. Well, and you've had a unique opportunity there because you've done a lot of PR, local and regional PR, that has, I think, really benefited South Dakota as well for getting people interested in sheep production.